Hi guys, it's Angie with Fun Endeavors Tie-Dye Lab. Today let's ice dye a Hemostat Mandala. I'm going to place the mandala on both the front and the back of the shirt, so I'm going to start by centering the shirt. This process is going to go really fast, but down below this video, in the description for the video, I have a link to another video which shows how to center a shirt. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm getting both halves of the front of the shirt right up next to each other and both halves of the back of the shirt right up next to each other. That way, whenever I apply the dye to the shirt, both halves of the front of the shirt are going to look more like each other, and the same thing with the back. I'm going to start by using a washable marker and placing a mark on my shirt where I'd like for the center of the mandala to be. I normally like to add my mandalas a little bit higher than the actual center of the shirt, so I'm going to place it just a little bit below the armpit of the shirt. Then to get a clean fold, I'm going to use a straight edge and place it on the mark that I just made on the shirt. Then I'm going to fold the hem of the shirt up. Now from here, I'm going to fold the hem back down part way, and the same thing with the other side of the shirt. Each time I make my folds, I'm going to make them to the same side of the shirt. So one side of my shirt is going to have a whole bunch of seams, and the other side will only have two. I'm going to fold each side of the shirt one more time, and this is going to give me an 8-point mandala. If you wanted to make a 16-point mandala, you would fold the shirt one more time on each side. Because I'm using hemostats, I don't want my fabric to be super thick, so I'm going to go ahead and stop with an 8-point mandala. I'm going to use my washable marker again, and I'm going to mark where I would like for the hemostat mandala to end. You can see the tag of the shirt, so I'm making my mark pretty close to the neck of the shirt. For this mandala, I'm going to use straight hemostats, but you can use curved hemostats if you'd like to. And I'm also using mainly 10 and 12-inch hemostats, which I've coated in heat shrink tubing. To coat my hemostats in heat shrink tubing, I take the tubing, place a piece over each side of the hemostat, over the teeth area, and then use a heat gun to shrink it to fit. Then if there's any excess hanging over the end, I use a pair of scissors and cut that off. That's going to help keep the hemostats from ripping a hole in my shirt. The first hemostat that I'm going to place on is at the very end at an angle. Then from here I'm going to begin applying hemostats on either side of the shirt, alternating sides. How you apply these hemostats is really just kind of a personal preference. You can take each hemostat all the way to the other side of the shirt. You can place it part way, pretty much however you want to apply it. If you'll notice, I'm applying each hemostat right up next to the hemostat before it. And then a viewer gave me a great suggestion about applying or adding a rubber band to the handles of the hemostats. So after I'm applying the hemostats to the shirt, I'm wrapping a small rubber band around the handle of each hemostat. That's going to help keep it from popping or flying across the room if it happens to come undone or pop off of the shirt. You have to watch when you use these hemostats because they are clamped down really tight on the shirt, and the shirt's pretty thick. So if they come undone, they literally can fly all the way across the room. So you need to watch and not hurt yourself when you're using these hemostats. So for the rest of the shirt, you can do whatever you want. You can either scrunch it up, you can try to tie something in this area. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make some really large accordion folds. I can only get just a couple of them in here, but it'll give a little bit of design to this area. I'm going to hold these folds in place with some rubber bands. Then I'm going to place this shirt aside and I'm going to let it dry out completely. I have got a super thick shirt because I'm tying both the front and the back at the same time. And I get better color saturation in the center of thick folds like this if I apply the dye when they're totally dry. If you'd like some more information about that, I have a link down below to my website, and I have a blog on my website where I discuss this topic in more detail. Before I begin applying the dye, I'm going to make myself an ice barrier. I'm using silicone cake molds, and I'm placing them in between the hemostats. Then to kind of hold the cake molds in place, I'm going to take some wooden clothespins and attach the cake molds together. Around the very bottom portion of the shirt, I'm going to attach some cake molds together and place them in that area, and then use some of the wooden clothespins to hold the cake molds up close to the shirt. That's what I really love about these cake molds, is you can use them to go around all kinds of weird shaped items. And then when you're finished and you're rinsing the shirt out, I just use a little bit of soapy water, scrub them up, and they clean up very nicely. I have a link to these down below in the description for this video as well. I have links to most of the items that I use when I tie-dye down below in the description. But if you're missing something, just drop me a comment or something and I will either send you a link or try to tell you where I purchased it. Then before I start applying the dye, because the shirt is totally dry, I'm going to spray it lightly with a little bit of soda ash that I've placed inside of a spray bottle. This is going to help the dye to stick to the top of the shirt better. Right at the very end or the center of the mandala, I'm going to add a color called Grecian Rose from Pro Chemical and Dye. Then I like to add a little bit of dimension to my mandalas by adding a darker color right up next to the hemostats. I'm only going to add the darker color on one side of the hemostat though, what I consider to be the bottom part of the hemostat. The darker color I'm going to use for this shirt is Imperial Purple from Dharma Trading Company. And if you'll notice, I'm trying to make my lines fairly thin, going right up next to that hemostat. I want it to give kind of like a shadow effect to the hemostats. Like I said, it'll add a little bit of dimension. To apply the dye in this small area, I'm using some of my small lab spoons. Some of the lab spoons that I have spatulas on the end, and you can use that too if you want to apply just a very small amount of dye. And because these lab spoons are stainless steel, I've found that the dye doesn't stick to them quite as bad as it does to plastic. I used to end up with a lot of static electricity on my plastic spoons, which would cause the dye to stick. In the areas made by the hemostats, I'm going to use blues, purples, and pinks. The first color that I applied was Robin's Egg Blue from Dharma Trading Company, followed by Lavender Fields from Dye Spin, then 80s Pink from Dye Spin. Now I'm using Aqua from Pro Chemical and Dye, followed by Plum from Dharma Trading Company, and in the last section, I'm going to add Fuchsia Red from Dharma. Then on the outside of the mandala area, I'm going to place Razzle Dazzle from Dharma Trading Company, and I'm going to take a stripe of Razzle Dazzle straight down the middle of the remaining area. I'm going to place Imperial Purple from Dharma on either side of the Razzle Dazzle. I'm going to place an additional sprinkle of dry soda ash over the top of the die, and then I'm going to add on some ice cubes. As the ice started to melt, I started to have some pretty large gaps in my ice on the very end portion of the shirt. So I came back and added some bagged ice to that area, and I kept layering the ice on top. I think all total I probably added about 3 layers of ice. Then on that very end area, because it is so thick, I actually just went and added one of my really large chunks of ice that I use when I gravity dye. After all the ice melted, I allowed the shirt to process for about 24 hours before I rinsed it out. I've added a few photos so you can see how the ice melted and what the shirt looked like. To rinse the shirt, I took it to my utility sink and I began rinsing it in cold water to rinse out the soda ash. Then I took the hemostats off of the shirt and warmed the water up to hot and continued rinsing in hot water to rinse out the excess dye that didn't bond with the fabric. Instead of continuing to rinse for a long time, I ran some really hot water in my utility sink, added a little bit of blue Dawn dish soap to the water, placed the shirt inside, and allowed it to soak. When the water cooled off, I changed it out, and I continued that soaking process until my water was remaining almost clear. Then I placed the shirt along with some Dharma's professional textile detergent into my washing machine, and I washed it using a hot water cycle. Okay, so I've washed, dried, and ironed the shirt, and let's see what it looks like. Okay, so what do you guys think? I think this one is really pretty. My only regret is that some of my colors kind of ran together. And by that I mean the 2 colors that I used on the very outer portion of the shirt, the Imperial Purple and the Razzle Dazzle, are pretty intense colors. They're gorgeous colors, but they are pretty bright and pretty dark colors. So because that part of the shirt kind of sloped down toward the hemostat portion of the shirt, they ran into that portion of the shirt. Because I placed those darker lines on the outside of my hemostats, my mandala does still stand out. So I can see those darker lines around the very last petal of my mandala. On that last mandala petal, I used fuchsia red. And it looks like it's blended a little bit with maybe the Razzle Dazzle and the Imperial Purple. So there's not quite as much contrast right there, but I still think that it looks really pretty. I really love the effect that Imperial Purple and Razzle Dazzle made. It almost looks like it's radiating away from the mandala. I think it's a really cool effect, especially up in the top portion of the shirt. It kind of almost, the lines are smaller. It almost looks a little bit like lightning coming out of that mandala. It's really a cool effect, and I think the colors are really pretty together. I also like the more peachy tone right in the center of that mandala. I think it just kind of adds enough of a contrast and a different shade that it draws your eye right to that area. Now, the robin's egg blue, which I put on the very first section outside of the center, just pretty much disappeared. The other purples and the aqua blue, they show up, but that robin's egg just pretty much disappears. So what do you guys think about those darker lines that I put on the outside of the hemostats? I do really think that those darker lines add just enough dimension that they kind of make that mandala pop out. So I think this shirt turned out really pretty. I do love purple. I'm not a total purple girl like some people are, but I really do think the purple and pink look really pretty together on this shirt. And that little pop of kind of the peachy pink mixed with what little bit of blue showed up looks really cool. But what do you guys think? Do you like the shirt? Do you like the dimension in the shirt? Please drop me some comments down below and let me know. And if you've enjoyed watching the video, I sure would appreciate it if you would like it and if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'll hit the bell, you'll receive a notification whenever I upload a new video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.